I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly, and welcome to the Gulf Coast Confidential podcast, where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up in Northwest Florida and elsewhere. And joining me as always to talk about these is Pam Hill. She's a pharmacist and victims advocate, sadly because she's experienced violent crime in her own family, so she brings a unique perspective to a lot of these crimes that we talk about. And this is certainly another unique case. This is not one that is Northwest Florida related. As folks who regularly follow this podcast know, we like to touch on other crimes because we feel like there's lessons that we can all learn and certainly things that we can all relate to. And this episode is called Slender Man Has No Face and These Tweenagers Have No Heart. This may ring a bell with some of you. There's an actual movie about this case involving Slender Man, which is an urban legend of a creepy fellow that basically they were in service to. And these two young girls in Wisconsin, 12 years old at the time, they lured another friend, also 12 years old, into a wooded area, stabbed her 19 times, y'all, all to appease this fictional weirdo character, Slender Man. And thank the Lord that young girl survived. And we're recounting this, but one of those young girls has been recently allowed to leave the mental health institution where she was sent. And we're going to talk a little bit about this case. I was not as familiar with it, but when I heard about it, I can say over the years I've heard of, we have a whole documentary out right now. We don't, but there is one that's out there called Mean Girls. Obviously the concept of Mean Girls is something that people are familiar with, but this was about homicidal mean girls. And it's something that you do see a pattern of, young teenagers, tweenagers not being able to control their emotions and doing something horrible. But just the length of time that these young girls plotted and calculated to kill this unsuspecting friend of theirs, it is a level of cruelty that's just hard to wrap your mind around. And mental illness certainly played a part, but how much of it was just meanness? Oh,
yeah, or evil. It is very disturbing because they're 12 years old. They're not even teenagers.
My daughter's age.
Right, exactly. Going to be a teenager next year, but still what we call a tweenager. And they're in 6th or 7th grade. But the three of these girls, they were over at, there's Morgan Geyser.
Yes.
And Anissa, I think her last name is Weier.
Yes.
And then there's Payton Leutner.
Yes.
Okay, so Anissa and Morgan it was Morgan's birthday, and they all were having a sleepover. Well, see, Anissa and Morgan, they were what were called the proxies, or the puppets of Slender Man. And you had to do certain things to get in the good graces of Slender Man. Like you said, supernatural, paranormal, anywhere from 6 to 14 feet tall, no face, a figureless face. It's white.
Very thin.
Right. Very, very slender and thin, always looking like he's wearing like a suit, a black suit, and then he got tentacles growing out of his back sometimes. And this character was kind of brought about by some graphic design contest that was on Creepypasta, which I think is a website that, that was just a contest. But it took off as an urban legend, and people think they have to do certain things to let Slender Man talk to them. Because Slender Man likes to, so they say, scare, abduct, and terrorize, especially children, in the forest. And every time they were talking about this, like we say in the woods down here, but up there they're saying in the forest. So these two girls, Morgan and Anissa, had decided they wanted to get in Slender Man's graces and that they didn't want Slender Man to hurt them or their family. So they said, well, we'll just kill Payton.
As a sacrifice.
As a sacrifice. Payton is clueless about this. Payton's the girl that you want your daughter to be. At school, she saw that Morgan was awkward, and so she invited her into her life. And it comes out, these girls are besties.
I know that's what's interesting. I read an article. 2020 did an interview with Payton years after she recovered from this stabbing. We're going to get into those crazy details. I mean, what a will to live this little girl had.
Oh, she's awesome.
Young woman now almost. But anyway, Payton talked about how she first became friends with Morgan Geyser and basically, said that Morgan was sitting by herself, and she said, "Oh, nobody should be alone." And she befriended her, and they were friends for a long time. And then Morgan and Anissa, I should say, became friends. And then Payton said she felt like Anissa resented her, was jealous of her friendship with Morgan. And she'd always known that Morgan struggled with some mental health issues to a certain extent, but not to the extent that everyone soon became aware of at this point. But that Anissa and Morgan became more and more infatuated and obsessed with this idea of the Slender Man. And she didn't necessarily participate in those conversations. She said it bothered her so much, she even went to her own mother and said, "Is any of this true?" And she goes, and her mom told her, "No, it's not real." And she goes, "I just got this tremendous sense of relief."
Yeah.
She goes, "I didn't want to hear about things like that. I didn't like to hear about things like that." She said, "But I didn't," and I'm paraphrasing here, but she basically just said, "I didn't judge my friends for being into it, but it wasn't my jam."
Right. Well, and the other two hooked onto it like nobody's business.
Right. And then apparently we're deep into it. And you've got one with certifiable mental illness and another one that apparently they fed into each other.
Right. Yeah, and there's always a leader or someone that can sway people. Well, Morgan, she thought she was a cat all the time. She slinked around the house. She did things like a cat. She licked things. She act like she's climbing on things. And so she thought she was a cat. And then so they had found later on.
I hope she used the bathroom.
I don't know how that went, But what they were saying was, and I'll tell you that because it's important a little bit later, that she's a cat. And, cats are sneaky and slinky and do stuff like that. So she was doing that when they went in her room after she had stabbed Payton and were just looking around. They also found that she had a history of mutilating her dolls, and pulling off arms and, stabbing them with scissors and stuff. And she told them straight up, "I think I can chit chat with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles too." So, there's all this other stuff going on.
Warning flags.
Right. And sometimes, I don't know if parents know it or not, but I would think you would kind of know if your kid's acting weirder than most.
And again, according to this article that I read from 2020, Payton talking about that relationship, she said they were asking her, do you blame her parents when they realized she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, because the father had also been diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Right.
And she said, I in essence, I've forgiven them because I think they were living their own hell. I don't think there was this deliberate attempt to ignore the warning signs. They were dealing with it the best they could. And she said, I don't think anybody, including myself, would have seen this coming.
Right. Yeah, I think her parents kind of knew because they had medication they had to give her, and it was antipsychotics.
Yes, exactly. So obviously there was some sort of concern, especially if your child's slinking around the house as a cat. Definitely. But at the same time, I'm sure as a parent, obviously that you love your child for the most part if you're a good parent, and there's no reason to believe that they didn't love her. And so I'm sure they were doing their best they could to adjust. But as Payton was saying, you wouldn't necessarily expect that this sort of homicidal plot was happening.
Right.
And at any rate, before we get into the details of just how long they had been determining this, let's talk about that day in the woods and how it turned into this fight for her life.
Okay. Well, they have what's called the folie à deux, which means shared madness. These two share the same folly, and it's Slender Man. So they had been doing this for like 6 months, planning this. So they have the birthday party, and the next day they say, "Let's go walking in the woods." They tell that to Payton.
Yeah, slumber party at Morgan's house.
And they said, "We had thought about stabbing her and killing her and stuff at the slumber party, but we didn't think we could see her eyes. That would kind of mess us up."
Horrible.
Yeah, they didn't want to see that. So they say, "Let's go walking in the forest." Like I said, I don't know why they use that word, but that's how they talk. And so they go out there and they say, "We're going to play hide and seek." So they say, "You lay down here, cover yourself up with leaves and sticks." And when they were telling this story, they were saying that Payton was there and there were pretty little wildflowers, and she was looking at those, but she didn't necessarily want to cover herself up with sticks because she thought, "How's this hide and seek? You see me right here." So anyway, they go off, and then Anissa can't stab her. She just cannot do it. But she tells Morgan to do it. And Morgan goes, well, so what am I supposed to do? She literally tells her, just go ballistic, just go berserk, go crazy. And so she said, when you hear Morgan telling the police what she did, it's eerie because they said, so what did you do? What was happening? And she said, she was there and I just stabbed her. And they said, and then what happened? She said, stab, 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 and said it many, many times like that. And she said that she just went berserk. Went crazy.
I know. I was reading that one stab wound was just with like a fraction.
An eighth of an inch from an artery.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
So thank the Lord. They said that there were 2 major organs that were impacted. But obviously she got help before it took her life.
Right. It basically, some of the wounds had gone through her spleen and her diaphragm. And so she... And at 12 years old, you got what, a gallon of blood in your body, and she's bleeding. And they left her. They'll say, we left her there to bleed out. When they
told her we're going to go get help.
Right, exactly. That's why I wrote this on this card, help. They told her we're going to go get you help. And Anissa straight up said, we weren't going to get her help. We were just going to let her bleed out and die.
Well, and Payton said that's when she realized too that they were not going to get help, and that's when she crawled, bloody and attacked. Internal, external bleeding, and made it to the side of a highway where a man found her and got her to the hospital. I think they said she was in the hospital for a week, underwent intensive surgery, and by the grace of God survived.
Right. A cyclist was coming by and he found her. She said, I got up and I held on, just like you see in a movie, I held on to trees to go from there to there because she was so weak. And she said, I just looked for a grassy patch where I could fall down. And she did. And the cyclist, he is so sweet. I've heard the 911 call. He called and he stayed calm. He had, he just said, there's a young girl here and she's bleeding. He didn't realize it was all those stabs because he's standing back and they said, well, can you do this? He said, I don't think I need to be rolling her over or basically making things worse. So it had dispatched 911 to come out. But she said she just didn't remember hardly any of that. She just got there somehow. And I just think she had strong will to live. But she has to feel betrayed and she's probably in shock.
And that's one of the things that she talked about in that article too, that she said she doesn't have a lot of memories of the attack itself and feels that that's also a gift of grace that she doesn't remember, but that trust has been a major issue. Her family, her mom also talked to 2020 and said that she's been she spent the last 5 years basically working on herself physically, emotionally, and one of those issues was trust. Being able to have friends that she trusted again, that she had walls up for a long time and even had issues with trust with her own family.
Wow.
And she said she sleeps with a pair of broken scissors under her pillow just in case.
Oh,
I know.
That's so sad. Yeah, they said she right after it, didn't want friends for a long time. And that's understandable. And then now she's college age and she had to make the change in college. So she's doing well, they say. And I think that was normal to go through all that. To be at the hands of someone going, we're playing hide and seek, you lay here, we're going to stab you, and then come back.
And leave you to die.
Leave you to die. After you that's the cruelest thing, telling someone, I'm going to get you help. Help is a word to me that I feel like every person in every crime or every case we talk about, that distress call is called out. Help. That word.
Yes, I know. And I was thinking too, they did leave her alive. At some point, it sounds as though she just got tired of stabbing. Geyser did. Morgan got tired of stabbing.
Yeah.
And so she's not dead. Otherwise, they couldn't have said, we're going to go get help. I think that's interesting that they didn't finish the job.
Right. They thought they did. Because Anissa said, where is Payton? Meaning they thought she had just been found. But she said, she's not dead? And they said, thank goodness. Because Anissa has some remorse. And Anissa has some awareness of what they did. Morgan...
But she didn't literally want the blood on her hands.
No, she didn't. But she pushed the other one to do it. It's like, I won't do it, but I'll stand here with you. And then it's interesting to watch their police interviews because Anissa was more like, I'm sorry, I can't believe I did that. But Morgan's like, I didn't care. I couldn't care. How do I know how to care?
Golly, I know. Well, it's interesting, too, when they had the trial, I guess they were both found not guilty by mental disease or defect and committed to mental health institutions. And like we were saying earlier, Weier received 25 years to life. Geyser got 40 years to life. And after 7 years, Weier was actually just granted custody, or excuse me, was granted early release, and she'll be under supervision until age 37.
They wanted to put GPS on her 24/7, and she has to go to psychiatric care. She has to take her antipsychotic medicine. And at some point, they were having escorts to take her to her counseling appointments. So they're trying to follow up with that. But the other girl, Morgan, she's asked for, she got more time because she's the actual stabber. And she is just stoic about it. She's just like, what do y'all want me to do? You know, I can't help that it happened. It happened. Let's move on. And it's kind of that kind of thing. And then she's like, don't send me back home, because she basically threw in there that her dad was molesting her. Then she threw in there, she said, I've lied to y'all in here. I'm not telling y'all the truth. And, you know, that sounds familiar to me. But also, she had said many things where she's brought in contraband. One time when she wanted to get out and appear before the judge, she withdrew her request because I think she knew, no, this ain't, because this judge is not playing. They had people that came up to testify that she wasn't a risk entirely, but she is a risk, a small risk. And the judge is like, nope, I'm ruling in favor of the public because she still is harmful and she still does pose a risk.
Absolutely. Well, thank goodness we had a judge that felt that way.
Yeah, I like that judge because he's basically saying, look, this is my decision and I've got to stand up for it.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting too, you know, again, listening to Payton and just how much she has processed a lot of this, but she, you know, again, felt like Anissa was super jealous because she was cruel to her. And then to find out what they later learned is that the two of these girls, Morgan and Anissa, had planned this for 6 months. And then she said, you know, she saw the red flags when she thought back to the birthday party and, you know, learned they had planned to kill her in her sleep and then changed their mind and then learned that they had changed their mind. They were planning to kill her in the forest, as you said, in the woods, but they all had donuts before they left the house. So they were still smiling and nice to her face and acting like everything was normal. And I always think about little girls, too. And I think a lot of women who are listening to this can remember as little girls, you know, it's not always easy to be a part of a 3-friend group. You know, when there's or even a 5-friend group, when there's an odd person, sometimes, whether it's a Lord of the Flies mentality or whatever the case may be, you know, somebody gets left out or somebody gets picked on. And yet I think about how she stayed in the situation anyway, because she did care about Morgan and she had originally been friends with Morgan, and how she put up with this cruel treatment from Anissa, clearly not knowing that it was going to become this deadly.
Right.
You know, but like, I just don't ever want my daughter to feel like she's got to put up with anybody being mean to her.
Yeah. And I think that's what we need to teach children, is that that's not acceptable and that is not normal, because these girls did sneaky little things too. They brought a knife like this out of the kitchen after the party, after the birthday party. They brought a knife. They brought them some little snacks, like these little Sour Patch Kids here, but they brought fruit roll-ups or gummies because they know they need energy. So they've been planning this. They're planning how to keep them stronger. This, to me, is not mental health too much and only. This is evil. When you do this and you plan and plan and plan, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a judge, I'm not a psychiatrist, none of that kind of stuff. I'm just saying how I feel. There's a difference between mental health and being evil, and sometimes I think it gets blurred and moved together, that kind of thing. Because they put this knife in a little bag like this, carried it up there, while the little girl's laying there playing with flowers.
I know, it's unbelievable. You know, it's interesting because I've used the term evil as well, but when it comes to, you know, clinical psychology and psychiatry, they don't necessarily believe in that concept of good and evil. There's a scientific or a forensic explanation for people's behavior. But I just saw a series on television that was basically based on a Stephen King novel, and there's a conversation between one of the main characters and a psychologist, and about some terrible things that are happening, and you know, the character says something along the lines of, well, this is evil behavior, and he said, you know, well, we don't necessarily believe in evil. And it got me thinking, well, you know, I am a girl of faith, so of course I do believe that there's good and bad, and you know, we need a savior in order to atone. But I don't know that there is an explanation for a lot of the evil that we do see in this world, for a lot of the bad behavior. There may be a mental health explanation, but sometimes people just want to do what's wrong.
Right.
And to
Right.
me, that's evil.
Right, that's a choice.
You're choosing.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a choice. And I do believe that some people choose evil because look how well it pays off for them.
Yes.
People do what works for them. That's a psychological tenet as well. We all do what works for us, except when we realize this is not right, a concept of right and wrong. They had a concept of right and wrong. You're doing something for 6 months. There's nobody on this earth that can convince me that's mental illness because that's meanness and that's evil. She may have been mentally ill, and that may be why she leaned that way. But when you kill somebody and you think about it, and it's another little girl, and you're a little girl, and you bring the knife, and you get her to lay down, and you do that, and then you tell her you're going to help her, and you run away, that's meanness, and that's evil.
Choice after choice after choice.
It was done and done and done. And what I don't understand is, and I see this a lot of times when I see cases where people are getting beat up or something, you know, why doesn't someone else say, well, all right, if you can't see that's right or wrong, I'll tell you that is wrong.
Well, and you talked about the folie à deux. Apparently, those two lived in the same apartment complex. They rode the school bus together. And Payton also felt like it was Weier who really convinced Morgan that there was a Slender Man, that he was real. She was already obsessed with it and already leaning that way. But to your point, like I think, you know, she wouldn't have gone over the edge to the extent that she did had she not found someone who was willing to walk that path with her.
And we make the choice. To me, it's like the old-timey campfires where people held the little flashlight under their chin and told little ghost stories or something. You know, if you have somebody going off with that. And I don't want to be misunderstood here. I do know that there's mental illness and people do things. But when you plan and implement things and implement how to sustain yourself, even if it's on gummies, you know, of course that's some flawed thinking and stuff. But I believe in right and wrong. And I believe that devils find devils, and I believe the devil's alive and well, and he uses anybody he can.
Yeah, absolutely. Birds of a feather.
Yep, even if it's
degree.
A little girl or two.
Absolutely. So what are your takeaways from this?
My takeaway from this is you know how I am. I'm pretty cautious. I want children that I'm responsible for near me. I don't want them running off into the woods, and if I see them toting something out of the house like in a bag, I'm going to look.
Yeah, it's interesting, too. Payton said that normally Morgan's mother would have come with them on this walk, but because it was her birthday and because there was 3 of them, she decided it would just be okay if the girls went by themselves.
And these are things that will haunt the mother forever, just like in when we talked about the freckle-faced killer, when the 13-year-old killed the 4-year-old boy when he was 1 block away from the park. He just said, Mommy, let me go by myself. It's right there. And it's the only time she ever did it.
I know. God love her. That is just tragic. And I am so happy that in this situation, Payton survived.
Yeah, I am. She is going to do wonderful things. And, you know, seems to be a person that has forgiveness and a person that's just soft and sweet. And I can't even imagine her believing in Slender Man.
I know, and it's definitely not something she gravitates towards, as she made clear in that interview. And she also said, which I thought was poignant, that she still has scars from the attack, but she believes they will fade someday.
I hope so.
And I think that was a sign of her spirit, that she wants to see the bright side. She wants to live on hope and love and focus on what's healing and not focus on what brought about this change.
Right. Because if she chose to concentrate on that, her mind could go down a rabbit hole thinking about, these were my friends. And I pray she doesn't think about that too much and goes the direction that she seems to be going.
Another takeaway, I thought, and we've certainly shared this one before, but she also shared in that 2020 interview that one of the things that she wished she'd known and could tell her 12-year-old self is, even if you're guilted into it, even if you've been friends for years, if you feel something is bad, you need to get out while you still can. And that's a quote directly from her in that 2020 interview. So again, I'm just so happy for her that she has overcome this and is learning from it and sharing what she's learned with all of us too.
A wise little soul.
Yes. Well, Pam, thank you so much for joining us on this story.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you so much for joining us. That is it for Slender Man Has No Face and These Tweenagers Have No Heart. We appreciate you joining us, as always, on Gulf Coast Confidential. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher, Pam Hill. And a big thanks to the guy who makes it all happen, our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. You can listen to more of our Gulf Coast Confidential conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and you can always watch on our Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe, y'all. It doesn't hurt a bit.
It's free.
All right, thanks. We'll see you next time.